Hi there, I'm Chadley McKnife, and for the past 5 years or so, I've been working on an apocalyptic webcomic called Life After Earth. So today I want to talk a bit about how I did that, how it's going, and what I feel I've learned from this whole experience. Life After Earth is the final form of a world and set of characters that I've had for a long time. It's changed a lot since I first started doodling it. Characters have been scrapped, new ones have been added, storylines have been created and thrown out, and many things have been simplified, but it is still on some level the same story. It's a sort of post-apocalyptic story with robots and teen angst. If I'm remembering correctly, my first attempt at writing it was in 2016 or early 2017, when I would have been around 12, though there may have been some earlier scrapped attempts. At first, I tried writing it like a novel, and I focused entirely on the robot characters, with the human characters as well-intentioned antagonists. I wrote 9 chapters before scrapping it. Sometime in 2017, I decided to try writing something just focusing on the teenage human characters. It was just something I was scribbling down in a notebook for fun, and I tried very hard not to take it seriously as I poured out my 13-year-old gay angst into it. Finally, at around age 14 and 15, I began working seriously on it as a comic script. I knew I wanted to make a comic as a way to learn the basics of visual storytelling and to improve my art. I had tried some of my other story ideas that I had lying around, but I struggled to find something that truly clicked. So eventually I began making Life After Earth. My thought was that if I could take one of my oldest stories/angst vehicles and turn it into a complete story, it would be a good display of commitment. I started writing my script by creating a bullet point outline of story beats, as well as an outline of my main plot points and their resolutions. I decided to go with a very planned out and structured approach. Once I got into writing the actual script, I made sure that with each chapter, I would hit at least one of the story beats on my outline. I also created a binder that keeps track of all of my characters, locations, and injuries that characters sustain to help me keep continuity. I have maps, character sheets, location sketches, and more that I've used as references for both the writing and drawing processes of this comic. There's a certain inertia to writing. It's very difficult to get started, but once you start it, it becomes really easy to just keep going. To help myself write and get through that initial difficulty of starting each day, I would write in silence with headphones on to block out noise, and I would set a 30-minute timer. I had to write in that 30 minutes, and if I did, I would get a dollar store mint as a reward. My goal was to write for 30 minutes to an hour almost every day, and having a ritual to it and a reward really helped. Often those 30 minutes would involve a lot of just sitting and thinking, especially at the very beginning, but in the end I would always get a decent amount of writing done. Listening to music is also part of my writing process, but not generally while doing the actual writing. Instead, I find that it helps to do it before or in between writing sessions to figure out the atmosphere and emotions that I want to capture. One thing to note is that I didn't originally include which sections of script go to which pages as part of my script, or any detailed description of how the page's composition should look, since I wanted to figure that stuff out during the thumbnailing process, and I decided to do thumbnailing and writing separately. Other than the way that the dialogue is formatted, it mostly reads like a very unpolished piece of prose with a lot of drawing instructions unrelated to the composition in it. In total, the process of writing the script took about 2 years of on and off work. I edited it as I went, read parts of it out loud to my siblings, rewrote my earlier chapters, and then continued editing. At some point, part of the way through, I realized that I hated the ending I had already begun to write. I was frustrated and starting to stress out about all the stuff I had already written that I had to scrap. so I took a several-month-long break to think on it before returning with a fixed version of the ending. Ultimately, this script is definitely closer to being a novel than what I had hoped for my first time making a comic. It's around 45,000 words long with 38 chapters. Most chapters are a little over 1,000 words of script. It's dense with science fiction world building and locations and characters and all the sorts of things that are so fun to write about but very, very difficult to spend years on end drawing over and over and over. When I finished the script, I realized that drawing this is going to take the rest of my fucking life, and I decided to go ahead anyway. I started drawing and eventually began uploading pages after I had drawn enough to have a little bit of a backlog of them to allow for a consistent uploading schedule. I've now been drawing it for around 3 years. Now, I want to get into a little explanation of how I make pages. I start with thumbnailing. I usually thumbnail a few pages at a time, and ideally I'll thumbnail the pages of each scene all together so that I can make all the pages in that scene work together more cohesively. If you don't know, the thumbnail is the tiny layout sketch that shows the basic flow of the page. The panels, the blocking, the speech bubbles, etc. Mine are definitely messy, but they get the job done. I have a letter or set of letters for each character that labels their individual chicken scratch, so I can keep track of where each of them is, especially in relation to each other. For the thumbnailing stage and the initial sketches, I also have to have my script open for me to look at while I work. Now, I am going to mention here that I very well could have made the writing and thumbnailing something that I do more in tandem, and I didn't. But I do edit the script sometimes quite a bit through the thumbnailing and sketch stages. I have my script there in front of me, and I go back and forth using the script to know what to draw and using my thumbnailing attempts to know what to change about my writing so that I can, in turn, give myself better instructions on what to draw. There are other ways to do this. I've chosen the one that I feel works for me and for this project, but there are other ways that people do it and other ways that people recommend. One stage that I didn't used to do consistently that I really should have been doing from the beginning is warm-ups. I've found that my work is much better after I've done some quick messy doodles for like 30 minutes to an hour. Ideally, I'll do that before sketching or doing line art for my pages, and it makes a huge difference in terms of quality. With these warm-ups, I try to focus on making fluid movements and shapes, which really helps me to be less stiff when I draw the actual pages. While I thumbnail and do warm-ups traditionally, I draw my actual pages digitally in Metabang Paint. Metabang Paint is free, and it's mostly able to work on the old laptop that I use to draw. It isn't a perfect app, but it works. The process of actually creating the digital page starts with creating a file using a page template, which just helps me to get the sizing right and keep track of the bleed area and such, stuff that's necessary if I ever want to print it. The template becomes the bottom layer, and I make it partially transparent during my initial sketches, just so that I have that as a guideline. I usually do 2 to 3 sketch layers in alternating red and blue. My first sketch is basically just copying off of my thumbnail, and then from there I add more details, clean things up, etc., until my final layer is nice enough that I can remove the other 2, set aside my script, and focus on my line art. For line art, how many layers I use just depends on how many I need, but for a usual page, I'll just need 2. One for the characters and foreground objects, and one for the background. The sketch and thumbnailing stages often end up requiring a bit more focus, which means that I should ideally stick to instrumental music or just silence in terms of what I listen to while working. But once I reach the line art stage, I can put on a podcast or a video, which I'll need for the many hours of tedious work. For this particular project, I decided on a simple style with smooth, clean line art, something which makes this stage a pain since I otherwise tend to prefer a messier style, but it makes the color and shading stages easier. It just takes a long time to get it to look nice. For color, I use black, white, and 3 different flat gray tones. I decided that I wanted to go with something simple and also easier to potentially get printed for my first project. This stage goes by very quickly. The only thing that bothers me about it is that limiting myself to these 3 shades of gray sometimes limits my ability to have nice contrast between the characters and the background. To fix this, I'll sometimes use white outlines, shadows, or other things that help the characters stand out against a background that's the same color as them. For shading, I just use a layer of black set to 45% opacity. For night scenes, light reflections, etc., I'll sometimes make things a little more complicated, but that's basically it. The first mistake that I made was probably overcommitting. Despite how much stuff I cut, I still overcommitted. The most obvious way that I did this was by switching perspectives. Life After Earth mainly follows the perspectives of George and David, 2 human teen boys. They are definitely the main characters. They drive the plot, it is about their trauma, and their emotional resolution is the end point of the story. It also follows the perspectives of Mary and Theomore, 2 robot deserters. I intertwined the stories of the 2 pairs so much that it would be difficult to follow if I removed the robot's perspective. I'm also rather attached to them. But it adds a lot more stuff to the story. Stuff that was easy to write, but will be very, very hard to draw. I've already drawn some of it, and if I changed the script now, it would remove the payoff for something I've already drawn and published, so I can't really walk back on this mistake, but I do find myself regretting it. It's hard to fully put into words what I've learned about visual storytelling as I've done this. As I've worked on this project and continued to build my artistic skills outside of it, I've learned a lot about what works and what doesn't, and what I want to do for other projects. I guess in particular, I think I've gotten a lot better at figuring out how I want to lay out my pages. I think there are these sorts of things that I knew I needed this project for because it's the sort of stuff that I needed to learn from doing, not just from watching other people do it. One part of this that I actually can put into words is that I think I've gotten a bit better at pacing. I'm interested in animation and film, and often when scenes play out in my head, that's how I imagine them. But comics involve a lot more skipping over things. You don't have continuous frames that show each motion and action smoothly. You have panels, and in between those panels are the things that you skip over. Over time, I think I've found it easier to figure out how to use that to pace my scenes better. I've also learned the skill of just doing it. Often I will look at my script and it will feel extremely daunting, and I'll feel like this is all beyond my level of drawing skill. But I've committed to this project, and so if something needs to be done for it, I'll do it. And I'll find that I'm just able to do it. I'm able to keep finishing pages, and I'm able to draw something that accurately conveys in visual form what the script says, even if I don't draw it perfectly. I admittedly have pretty severe anxiety, and I think that committing to finishing this, even if it isn't perfect, has been helpful for me in a way, in terms of allowing me to push through my perfectionism and tendency to avoid and procrastinate in anticipation of something being wrong. My desire to complete this project has surpassed my desire to avoid doing anything that could ever go wrong, and I've found myself able to consistently draw these sometimes difficult scenes and keep going even though it's frustrating and nerve-wracking. One thing that's been difficult about working on this comic is just how much older I am than I was when I started. It's been like 5 years. I've gone from a young teenager to a young adult. I am not the same person I was when I first started writing the script. I'm not the same person I was when I initially finished it, and I'm not the same person I was when I first started uploading pages. The story and the characters feel increasingly distant from me and from who I am, even as I'm still passionate about what I'm doing. This is an inevitable effect of doing something like this while you're still young. I'm gaining valuable experience and knowledge while I have the free time. I'm spending my youth on something I enjoy, and the cost of being so lucky is that I'm committed to a project I started as a young teenager, and now I'm 18 years old drawing a story that was written by a child, and that sometimes feels a little embarrassing. There's a lot of writing decisions that I made that I am not really happy with anymore, but I've chosen to stick with them. For the most part, there are some things that I'm rewriting as I go. Lastly, when I first started this comic, my intention was to have a consistent weekly uploading schedule. This did not work out. These pages take a lot of time to make, and I pretty quickly used up my backlog, and pretty soon I was finishing pages last minute and barely meeting the deadlines I had set for myself. Eventually, I switched to a once every 2 weeks uploading schedule, and then to no schedule at all. And this is because making this comic is not my full-time job. I am a student. I have schoolwork, and I have stuff that I need to do, and I'm busy and I cannot devote 8 hours a day to drawing it. And to be honest, my uploading schedule is probably going to remain inconsistent as I continue to get older and move on to other things. I am going to finish this comic, and right now I feel like I'm able to devote more time to it, but it won't be that way forever, and I'm going to have more projects in the future, and eventually this comic is going to have to go on the back burner. But it's taught me a lot, and I've enjoyed working on it, and I will finish it. Eventually. Thank you for watching. I'm sorry about the sort of poor quality. At this point in time, I don't really have the resources to make my YouTube videos fancier. I do intend to keep making videos when I have the time, and at some point I may, for example, get an actual microphone so that I can have some somewhat more decent audio quality. Yeah, so the reason that I decided to make this video this way, I was already planning on making a video about this project, but the reason I decided to make it sort of instructional-ish is because when I was first starting to work on Life After Earth, I watched a lot of videos where people were talking about their experiences doing comics. And I found it really helpful just to, hear different people talk about that. And so I thought it might be helpful for me to add my experience to the pile so that someone else who's wanting to start a webcomic will be able to hear some of my experiences and maybe learn from some of my mistakes. But yeah, so thank you for watching. I'm probably going to do some more YouTube videos in the future, not necessarily about my artistic process, but maybe like media reviews, video essays, that type of thing. So until next time, bye.